What's going on, everybody? We are back at the Club and Sub podcast. This is the inaugural DFS episode. So we're going to start doing this every week. Luke and myself will have guests pretty frequently. Tonight we got Joe Suntszu. I'm sure he'll be with us fairly frequently on this. Just going to break into this now. You know, obviously Joe's been playing it forever. Luke's been playing DFS a while. I've been playing it for a while. Just some more content to put out there and just kind of have some fun with. Going to be a bit more free-flowing than, the normal Wednesday night podcast. But, yeah, should be fun. So we'll get right into it. Joe, thanks for joining us. I guess I'll start with you here. Any thoughts just like on that? We'll start with the top range, I guess. Any thoughts on the top range just in general?
Well, I mean, first of all, we finally got all the salaries, although I hear there's still a number that FanDuel needs to put up. So we're predominantly going to talk DraftKings here. Right. Yeah. So, you got this upper range, which honestly looks okay. I'm actually more interested in the mid range myself. I think, for cash, and again, we'll talk cash GPPs. For cash, I think Cody Stamen is pretty much a lock. I don't know that he's the best GPP play. Just like I don't know that, what's his name? Our good friend who's fighting Frankie Edgar. Is a great play in GPPs. I mean, Frankie Edgar could be tough, but Sandhagen could do something. Now we got to look at the new scoring and just remember, guys, that the scores you're seeing in the DraftKings fighters bios are based off of the new scoring system. So you could take a look at that and see how they would have scored under the new system in their old fights. And it's pretty compelling. Like, Corey Sandhagen, if you look at his first three fights, he scored over 100 points, right? But he has not really broken 100 points recently, in his last couple fights. Obviously, that quick loss to Aljamain didn't help. Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's some more value, in that mid-range, like Volkov and Rosen. We could talk about that, but I think there's some safety up there for cash, but I'm not completely thrilled with, GPPs. Maybe slow Mike Rodriguez a little bit, because that fight has got a pretty good inside the distance prop, and that fight should get some exposure. But, like the top, I think you could fade. I think you could certainly fade Sandhagen and feel pretty good about it, and move on.
Luke, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of with Joe as well. I know. I guess I kind of want to also get Joe's opinion on this, just with how long you've been doing it. Like when you have these guys that are in, the upper range here, and you're really going to obviously have to, pay up and bump down and go dumpster diving a bit if you're going to play a couple of them. And guys like Smith, where to me he really is pretty reliant on an early finish here, at least historically. So I guess what's your philosophy on paying up for some of these bigger guys where, if that outcome does come to fruition and it happens, they're obviously going to score really well. But in the scenario that they don't, it's like I've always just been hesitant to, really load up on some of those guys, like just because it seems so obvious that's what should happen. But if it doesn't, I mean, then you're caught overexposed to a guy that you had to lay a pretty decent price on.
Well, see, the way I look at it is, and maybe I do it a little bit differently, but I build from the bottom up, right? So I look for where there's value first. Like, and let's be honest here. We're not giving out any trade secrets by telling you that, Ozzy's little brother, Odie, is going to be the highest owned fighter on the slate because he's minus 200 at 7.8K, right? So, again, at least in cash, and obviously Rivera will probably be a good contrarian play, but generally anybody who is starting their builds are going to start with the 7.8K Rivera, right? And then you want to look for maybe someone else under 8K who you like, and then start looking at who you want to fill in from the top range, who you want to fill in from the medium range. Now, if you want to play multiple lineups, and this is a great question, someone's asking, do you guys use lineup generators? I do to a certain extent. It really depends on how many lineups I'm building, right? And I have in the past, although I haven't done it recently, I've maxed out like the main contest. I played 150 lineups, and it's virtually impossible to build that many lineups by hand. So I will use again, nobody on this podcast is selling a lineup optimizer or a service. So I'll give you my recommendations. Look, I like the DFS Army optimizer, Brett Apley's, figures go in there. His projections, I like it. Obviously I will say though that for MMA, I've noticed a lot of errors in the Fantasy Cruncher optimizer. As good as it has been for other sports, I've noticed some errors in salaries. I've noticed errors in odds. I like the DFS Army optimizer. There are other optimizers out there, but just remember, don't let the you don't use an optimizer to pick your lineups. You use an optimizer to build your lineup. So you set your percentages. You may want to have like 2 unique fighters in a lineup. You may want to put a variance. Learn how the optimizer works. Like, don't just go in and say, okay, I want to generate 10 lineups, because then you're relying on someone else's projections. And in all honesty, if it's a popular lineup optimizer, there's probably, 100 other people that are going to have those same lineups, right? So generally speaking, I'll build maybe up to 20 lineups by hand. And then anything outside of that, I'll use a lineup optimizer for.
Yeah, fair. Luke, did you want to touch on anything else in that range, or?
I guess I will say kind of similar with Joe. I'm not really sold on Sandhagen necessarily at 9.4K. Even though I do think him by KO, just from a general betting perspective, has some potential value. But then again, you got Smith right there, who I think is probably live for a KO early. But I am going to kind of have like a slight contrarian take, at least from like a GPP perspective. I think I'm probably actually going to be a little bit more overexposed to Stamen. I know he hasn't scored well historically, but me and John were kind of talking about this before we went live. I think it could be like a Ricky Simone, Gaetano Perello scenario where Simone, isn't a guy, who's a historic finisher, but he's getting a decent sized step down and probably one of the more winnable fights in his career. So I kind of feel like that's a spot here similar for Stamen, where I think he's pretty live for a KO if he wants to get takedowns. He can get into dominant positions, either maybe finish via ground and pound or grab a sub. So, and his metrics are solid. He, attempts and lands a decent amount of shots. I think he averages almost 3 takedowns per 15 minutes, gets him at a pretty solid clip. So I know, I guess I might be on a bit of an island here. I'm obviously going to have a ton of them in cash, but I think I am going to take a decent stance on him and GPPs as well, because I think a couple of these other guys might be a little boomer busty.
One of the things before John steps in, you guys are much better handicappers than I am in terms of setting lines. Like I generally don't set my own lines. Like I look for value, and I certainly have opinions on certain fights. I mean, it's pretty well known that I like women's MMA. Right or wrong, I've been given that name, the Chick Whisperer. It did not work, honestly, last slate. But like what you should do is, if you're predominantly a bettor and you're going into MMA, try to use those lines that you set to find value in the DraftKings salaries. So if you see a line that's way off, that's going to actually correlate into value for DraftKings salaries. And that's honestly, I do think there is some level of correlation between, betting on the fights and using that information that you use to line a fight to come up with DFS.
Someone on Brett's pod for last time mentioned Marina Rodriguez and Marcin Prochnio. I wonder who that could have been.
Yeah, I know. You really got me there, I have to say. I actually referred to John as the anti-Chick Whisperer. And everything was looking so good for Ribas. She actually went into that strawweight fight at 143 pounds. Like, I saw that, and I'm like, I was running to the betting windows. Thank God I was not in Vegas. I mean, I literally would have been like, my friend who's a high roll, I'm like, Terry, hand me a $5,000 chip. I want to put it on you. I mean, 143, in a 115 fight, then she just completely shit the bed in the second round and just fell right into the trap of Marina Rodriguez. So, good call, John.
I agree with what you're saying, Joe. I mean, I guess I don't really love, I'm looking at this slate in the upper half here. It's like, I sort of agree with Luke to an extent because I do think Salmon's relatively safe. Plus, this feels like a vintage. Okay, here are the new rules that we're working with for DFS here. Like, look at Valiv is probably, I think, is he actually Sandhagen's the biggest favorite, but that fight is, what's the ITD line on that fight? Sandhagen Edgar. It's
not great.
Yeah, over 2.5 goes to decision -200. So I agree with you. I don't think Sandhagen probably scores that great, especially because you have to figure that, if Frankie's trying to win that fight, he's going to try to be grinding a bit, which probably, even if Sandhagen looks good, might suppress some volume. Then you look at Valiv, and that's another one. It's like it's -130 to end ITD, but like Luke bet Valiv by decision. I don't really totally disagree with that. I actually kind of sort of think Martin Day is a little alive there. Just my take. I don't know. Like, I don't think Valiv's going to be. He hasn't traditionally been some massive finisher, and he's another one. Like, I get he went off against Jones in round 1, but Jones is kind of. Jones is not the same level of competition that Day is, in my opinion, anyway.
Did you see any of the, like, there was a little bit of an interview with Day, and he, I think it was the guy that does Awesome Mo with Pete the Heat. He interviewed Martin Day, and Day is really relaxed. Like, in his mind, he's got no pressure. Like he's going to just go for it. And now he is coming off of 3 L's. So typically, if he lost this fight, he would be cut. Right, he'd be fighting for a pink slip. I feel that the UFC might have made a deal with him and said, irrespective of what happens here, we'll give you another fight. So if that's the case, then he's really got no pressure on him. So I would not mind taking a punch shot with him at a really low price.
I agree, and like even if Valiv does finish him, like I don't think he's likely to put him out early, and so it's like again. 10x on that. Like, I guess he could get 93 in a second round finish. But again, like, I don't think it's super likely. Like, the only guy in there who really, I guess Sandhagen, if he can find an early finish, but the only guy in there who really jumps out to me, like, really, well, 2 of them, Smith and Rodriguez, both seem like they are very, very live for first round finish. But I like James against Smith, to be honest. Like, I'll be playing plenty of Smith just because, like, he is one of those guys who maybe gives you the high roll and hits that 1 minute KO. Like, he's got the power for it. James is hittable. But Smith's got a lot of weaknesses that James can exploit. And then Rodriguez, how can you trust Mike Rodriguez at this point? So it's like, it's a weird area where it's like, I think those two probably have the best upside. Stammen's probably the most consistent, and I don't really know what to do with the other two. So,
well, you just be honest. You like the Guitar Hero nickname against Slow Mike. Like you got the Guitar Hero against Slow Mike. That I believe that fight does have the greatest inside the distance line, right?
Yeah, you have to be on that fight.
Yeah, in GPPs, you should certainly have some ownership, and what everybody needs to think about now, and it's a double-edged sword, right? We all love the increase in prize pools in MMA. The downside to that is it's brought over a lot of big bankroll players from other sports, and when you start to see like Papa Gates and Chipotle Addict, by the way, who's Papa Gates' brother, when Chipotle Addict's played MMA for a while and then kind of faded away, and now he's back, and you see guys like Ship My Money from Awesome Mo and like Awesome Mo playing, and like guys like that with big bankrolls coming in. There is a certain style to how they play, right? A lot of these guys look for line value, right? And they build lineups around line value. So the way to beat these guys is to go against line value where you feel you have an edge. And that's why, like, I don't normally go after McLovin. And McLovin is one of the big bankroll guys that's been playing MMA from day one. I generally won't go after him unless I feel that, because I pretty much know what his lineup's going to be, right? And if I feel that I have some hot take on going against line value, sure, I'll play him in a 3-man. Like, I'll go into one of those infamous, Empire Maker McLovin 3-mans because I feel I have some advantage because I actually know MMA, right? Where a lot of these guys, and not to say they don't know MMA, but I can tell that they're building their lineups around odds value.
Right. No, for sure. And that makes sense. So let's move on. Let's go to the mid-range. Luke, I'll start with you here. Like, just general thoughts, plays you really like in here for DFS, and a couple people who maybe you don't like that.
Yeah, I think, well, just off the top, Michael Johnson's kind of interesting. But personally, I'm probably going to be pretty underweight to him as well, just because he just tends to be a bit of a snowflake, to be honest. So it's one of those spots where he could be, just looking great, because in general, I think it's a decent spot for him, but I think he's just a hard guy to trust at a pretty big price point. But actually, one girl I do like is Hosa at 8.7K, despite me actually betting her via decision. I mean, she scored really highly in both of her last two fights. I think over 100 points in both by decision here. And I think it's going to be a relatively high action fight where she's going to be able to land a couple takedowns too, where, despite my bet, I think a sub from her potentially could be live, because I think she is the better grappler as well. Has shown some pop in her punches. She dropped Procopio too, I believe. So I think at 8.7K, I think it's a pretty safe play for both cash and GPPs, just based on me thinking that she has Edwards covered just about everywhere. And then even in a decision, I think she can still score really well for the price point. So I'm going to have a decent amount of exposure to her. I'm going to have a decent amount to Volkov too at 8.6. I don't think he smokes Overeem early, but I predicted more like a round 3, round 4 KO for him. I think it'll be more of a attritional type KO where he's going to be the more higher output guy. And I think that eventually comes. My one slight concern for it is if Overeem is able to land takedowns in the fight. That's obviously going to significantly limit that score, but it is a 5-round fight. And I do think Volkov has a pretty decent gas tank to keep that up. So I like him at 8.6. CDF and Dariush, I'm kind of curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this one, because I think it's a fight that you almost have to have exposure to both sides, but I don't think I'm going to have a ton of the fight overall. Personally, just because I don't have a great read on either side. And I'm actually on the contrarian side that I think it goes over 2.5 as well. So that's kind of my general thoughts on the mid-range.
Yeah, Joe, how about you?
Well, yeah, I told you, I kind of led with I like the mid-range. Great take on Hosa. She is a fight metric special. Like, do I legitimately believe she landed 120 significant strikes in her last fight? No. But that was a fight that fight metrics, again, scored very aggressively. So you are absolutely correct. I mean, it's not too often you see a fighter that has an average score of 110.7. I think she's going to be pretty popular for that reason. And you're right. She did drop Propecia, and she did have a couple of takedowns, in her last fight. So I think I think Edwards is got a lot of raw talent, and she's going to be the bigger fighter. And when I first looked at this fight, I'm like, Edwards, I kind of like her as an underdog. And then I kind of rewatched her last fight, and while she did some things right, she's really green. But she is going to have, I believe, the strength advantage. She's definitely going to have the size advantage. Makes me a little nervous. I really do like Volkov a lot in this fight. I think he's a really good fighter. Outside of that, mishap against, Derek Lewis. McCann, that could be a pretty interesting fight. But let's move down to Pantoja, right? So this, this guy that they brought in to fight Pantoja, right? Yes. He's been fighting with shoes on, so I don't know if you guys, I haven't got a chance to listen to your gambling pod yet or your betting pod, but I don't know, man. I don't think this is like a gimme. I get that they bring this guy in, but Pantoja at 8.3K, he is going to score in his last 3 wins. He's averaged, I think one he put up 98, but he's averaged over 100 points in his last 3 wins. He had a really competitive fight against Devison. Sometimes he has some mental lapses, but I don't know, man. I like him a fair amount here at 8.3K. And then just going down to the Ferrer-Dariush fight, this is, believe it or not, a rematch. These guys fought 6 years ago. Benny, I believe, is still only 31, and I believe Ferrer is 36. Believe it or not, Benny is like the far more active fighter here. I honestly believe his stand-up is better. He works with Master Rafael Cordero at King's MMA. My issue with Benny has always been like I perceived him to have a lot of outside interests. He got married, had a gym, and then I got this article from Jimmy C. Thank you, and I did not realize the extent of the injuries that he was battling back from. And now that he's healthy, and how good does that Drew Dober win look now? Like as good as Dober has been. So I like Ferreira. He's been good to me, but I really do think at this price, I kind of like Dariush here as at least a DraftKings dog at 8K. So there's really a lot of interesting ways to go in this mid range.
Yeah, agreed. To be honest, you guys, I don't expect this to happen, but it wouldn't totally shock me to see something crazy like 6 people from the 7 to 8K range end up optimal. It's that kind of a weird card where it's like I don't really trust the guys who I do think have the highest upside in the high range. In terms of the fights, I'm with you on Pantoja a good bit, Joe. Actually, we'll talk about Cape in a second, but I like both sides of that fight. I kind of think if either guy's having success where they need to have success, the chances of it finishing are pretty high. Both guys probably have round 1 upside, to be honest. It's just like given Pantoja, if Pantoja's not, if he's having the grappling success, he's probably going to submit him. And if he's not, you guys know Pantoja, he's just going to go to war. And if they go to war, I don't think this is going 15 minutes personally. So I think that's a pretty strong fight to target. Dariush Fajeda, I don't really love Fajeda, to be honest, in this spot. Not even talking about it from a win perspective, but just like if you look at, obviously against Pettis, he scored well because he finished him in round 2 in submission. But I don't think you can reasonably project him to submit Dariush. In his last 2 wins prior to that against Khabilov and Taysumov, both of which, the Taysumov fight seemed to be, right, like his ideal way to win this, kind of just go forward, out-volume Dariush. He put up 75 points in the new scoring system in that fight against Khabilov, which that could look like this too with Dariush trying to initiate the grappling a lot. He put up 65 points in that fight as well. He could knock out Dariush, but I don't think he's the biggest hitter. And I think if Dariush is fighting like he always does fairly intelligently, the chances of Dariush giving him that kind of a firefight are fairly minimal. So I don't really love Fajeda there. I'll probably have a little exposure, but nothing serious. Dariush I actually do like, kind of to the same point. If Fajeda's going forward and they end up swinging, I kind of think Dariush has the better chance of finishing him early. And just with the new grappling scoring, I'm not convinced that Dariush can hold him down like he did in the first fight. But if he can, he's got some pretty significant upside there as well. And then, I'm with you guys on Hosta. She's a pretty good spot here, I think. Just for the volume alone, if she puts up 160 strikes, she's going to pay that number off. So, yeah, even if she doesn't finish her. And, as I said, Volkov I love. I'm not sure if I'd play him on the betting line, but, the volume combined with – look, if he wins the fight, you have to assume Overeem's not getting a ton of top time, right? And even if it goes to a decision, Volkov might land near 200 significant strikes in that case. And at 8,700, he's going to pay that off, right? So I like Volkov a lot. So, yeah, I think we're mostly in agreement here. I really love this range. I guess of the people that I probably won't have a ton of exposure to, obviously McCann, I just don't see really a viable path for her scoring big. Even looking at her wins, she had 109 against Belbita, but, that's Diana Belbita.
Yeah.
And then, Luke, I see the angle on Michael Johnson. I'm just so like, oh, God. Like, do I really –
Yeah, here's a guy who beat Tony Ferguson. And Dustin Poirier. And Dustin Poirier. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like if he gets the first round knockout, he's worth rostering. I'm just like, I personally am betting Clay Guida, so I'm hoping he doesn't get there.
Wow.
He doesn't get that knockout.
Wow.
Let's move to the lower range. We'll go through this, and then we'll just talk broadly about lineup construction. Joe, you want to take it away? What do you like down here? What do you not like down here?
Yeah. So let's take a look at the lower range. So obviously, look, I mean, we all know the highest owned fighter is going to be, Ozzy's little brother here. It's very rare that you have two fighters going off against each other that are both sub 8K, which is something that you have here with ODO. So that is probably, and again, it makes me a little nervous, but he got Brian boomed last out. What was interesting about Odie is, like, I did a show with Brett and Dan Levy and, Kyle Marley, and we did like a prospect show, and, we each picked a couple of fighters that we were watching. And, the two fighters that I remember picking, one of them was Ozzy Osbourne here, or Odie Osbourne. And the other was, the sumo guy, the Hulk, the guy that slams people. Yeah. So those were the two guys I picked, right? So I was really excited to watch Odie fight. And, look, I'll kind of write it off to maybe octagon jitters. We all know that, Kelleher, the one thing he's got a great guillotine, like he just will lock you up, and that's what he did. And, this is a much better spot for him here, obviously, against Rivera. I think he should be able to win this fight all day. So he's going to be really popular. You're not really going to differentiate yourself all that much by plugging him in. Definitely use him in cash. I talked about there being some value in Edwards. Very green, but should have some strength and height advantages. You talked about the Carpenter. We talked a little bit about Propecia. So here's one. Again, I'll let you talk about Marquez Rodriguez. But where I think that there might be a little bit of value here is my friend from the great Republic of South Korea, Choi. I think Zalal is a little overhyped, and Choi is massive for the weight class. He is 6 foot tall. He is tough. I can certainly see him putting up a fight here. And Zalal is coming off a loss. Look, I think Zalal is probably a better fighter, yes, but I certainly could see Choi getting his licks in. Tough guy. 7.1K. If you're looking for some value, I could certainly see, Choi, and then obviously you got Frankie, who no one wants to write Frankie off, and I think Mr. Stargarian likes Martin Day. So I see a little bit of value, not a great amount of value, like under 7.5K. But the plug and play is Odie here.
Yeah, agreed. Luke, how about you?
Yeah, so I probably am not going to have very many shares of anybody under 7K. I'm probably going to have just a little bit of Day, a little bit of Edgar. I'm going to completely fade Askar, to be completely honest. I'm going to have some Janes. I'm going to be overweight on Janes too, because it's another one of these situations where I think if Smith doesn't kill him early, I think Janes is also live for a KO early as well. I don't think Smith's defensive tendencies are very good, and I think there's a pretty clear path on the ground for Justin Janes, assuming Devontae Smith hasn't improved his grappling. Janes is a former collegiate wrestler, BJJ brown belt as well. We haven't seen a ton of his grappling, at least in recent years, because he's a guy who's confident in his hands and, ready to let him fly. But anytime there's a guy, at 7K, or even a really big dog who I think has a pretty clear path as well and can be competitive even in the other realm, I'm gonna have an overweight stance on Janes. I'm gonna have some Choi as well. I was considering betting him in general, but I'd like a little bit better of a price for DraftKings. I'm gonna have some of him as well, but my concern for Choi is that, assuming Choi is having a lot of success at range, I think you're going to see Zalal start to shoot takedowns and potentially slow this fight down. I actually do think Choi is going to be able to provide some resistance to those takedowns, but if if Zalal is able to get him down, I think that's really going to be the big thing that potentially is going to limit Choi upside here. But I do think Choi is also potentially live for a KO because I still think Zalal has some poor defensive tendencies as well. So I'm going to have some of Choi. I'm also going to have some of Marquez. I know people are going to call me crazy, but it's a similar scenario where, what have we seen of Mike Rodriguez out of the first round? Hasn't looked pretty in 3 different fights that have went out of the first round. And John, you kind of touched on our podcast last night where, Marquez, despite him pretty much possessing almost no striking, from a DraftKings perspective, I almost kind of like that because it's like he doesn't have a choice. He has to grapple. He has to. Like, he doesn't have a choice. So, if you're rostering Marquez, you fully know going in, he may die here within 2 minutes. But if he doesn't, he might be able to, get some takedowns, get a ton of control time, maybe even get a submission. So I'm going to have a little bit of an overweight stance to Marquez. I'm going to have a little bit of Rivera too, just because Ode, once again, another round 1 guy. I think Rivera has shown at least some takedown upside. So I'm going to have a little bit of him, not a ton of Edwards and not a ton of Guida. We'll have some Overeem for that potential takedown consideration. Maybe be able to get a lot of top time. Guys have gotten a decent amount of top time on Volkov when they take him down. So I don't hate Overeem. Procopio, that one's a little interesting, I guess. I'll probably have some of her as well. But in terms of Osborne, as you touched on, Joe, I think, you got to play him. But if you're trying to differentiate yourself, I guess maybe it'd be better to take at least a slightly underweight stance on it.
True.
Yeah. So I love this range, to be honest. And I don't know in terms of percentages if it'll be my heaviest range, but I think in terms of total fighters, I'm likely to have more people from this range than any other. Like I said, I think there's a decent case for every dog on this card, really. I'm going to have a decent amount of Jane's exposure. I pretty much think that, first of all, he's obviously live for the knockout, even if he could also get deaded early. And to be honest, we've seen Smith really doesn't have much grappling. Like, who knows if James will go for it or not, but James is a brown belt, and he's the wrestling coach at Extreme Couture. Like, if he decides he wants to put Smith on the ground, he can probably put him there, and there's a fairly good chance he submits him if he puts him there, in my opinion anyway, at least based off of the data that we have available from Smith's grappling. So I have a fair bit of interest in him. In terms of Day, like I said, I think there's value on Day and I think there's value on Edgar, but I'm kind of with Luke in that not going to be heavily exposed to either. I think both could win, but I don't think either do at like a near 50% clip or even a 40% clip, just more on their line. And I think there's other spots here. Like even Cape, I like Cape a good bit here because like I said, I kind of think that fight's going to be somewhat binary. And I think if they're swinging, he's pretty live for a knockout. Overeem, obviously, I think it's pretty clear if he wins, he's going to pay that price off. And then I actually like Procopio a lot, to be honest. Look, she landed 165 significant strikes against Hossa. McCann is not someone who's going to really slow the pace down. So if they're swinging, she's going to throw. We know that at least. And, if she grapples, we've seen McCann is not very good when she gets put on the ground. She's got some submission upside there. So I actually like Procopio a good bit, both in general and specifically for DFS. Other than that, I'll have some exposure to Gita, and, I like Choi as well. I like a lot in this range, and that brings me to something I want to touch on with both of you guys. So I know you guys are just both talking about Ode, and look, he's going to be very, very heavily rostered. I'd imagine probably the most on the card, right?
Should be.
Yeah, but like, I get maybe wanting to take a contrarian stance to win a GPP, but at the same time, though, and this is what I'm thinking about, like if you go into this with the assumption, as I am at any rate, that there's a great deal of value in the low range and that you're going to have a lot of dogs win, are you really hurting yourself if you kind of overexpose yourself to the low and mid range versus the high range if you go heavy on Ode? Because I think a lot of the people in there are going to be, heavy on Ode with a little bit more exposure to the top range rather than the other ranges, right? I'm just curious on what's your take on that, Joe?
Yeah, so I want to share a quick story. So, I was fortunate enough to interview one of the winners of the Millie Maker that we had in in MMA. Great guy. His name is Paul. Him and his fiance play DFS. He actually reached out to me after he won. He tied for first. He won $300,000, which is life-changing money for anybody. He won $300,000. He actually DM'd me and said, "You don't know me, but I've been following you for a while. Can I give you a call? I want to talk about all this money I won." So I'm like, "Call me, man. I'd love to talk to you." So I was shocked that anyone who had, and if you guys don't remember, that was Amanda Nunes. She was fighting Felicia Spencer. Yep. And I would never have thought that an Amanda Nunes lineup would have actually been a Millie Maker winner, right? Just because, everybody was playing her against Felicia Spencer. He had Amanda Nunes in the lineup. So, yes, if you're playing, I guess there are two ways to look at it. You put him in every single lineup and you just cover all the different combinations. Or if you're not playing a lot of lineups, then you take the contrarian stance. So I really think you have to look at, since we're talking about lineup construction, how many lineups are you going to play? Yeah. Like my good friend Marley, he will hit the done button on fighters and play them, 150 times. Like he won't even think about it. He's like, I like this guy. I'm going to hit done. I'm going to live or die with this one fighter, right? And he'll do that. Now I'm more hesitant to do that because, again, it's in my DNA to hedge. Right. So it depends. If I'm paying, even if I'm playing 20 lineups, I have to have a share of everybody, right? Even if it's only one in one lineup. Right. So there are different strategies. Like if you're going to play 150 lineups, if you're going to max out the $18 contest this week and go after the 100,000 and you really, like Odie at 7.8K, play him 150 times and just make sure you have different combinations or a bunch of different combinations, lock that one guy in, and look, there's still a shot that you can win, take down the big pool. Because look, it happened in the Millie Maker with Amanda Nunes.
Right. What do you think, Luke, in terms of Ode versus how much do you want to have exposure there? And
yeah, well, I guess it's interesting because you brought it up before with me actually liking a decent amount of these other dogs too. So I'll probably have a decent amount of them. I still don't want to go all in on the guy, even though obviously the price makes sense. It's a good spot for him, but he's still another guy just from a general breakdown perspective that he's a first round guy. I'm just always skeptical about these guys who are first round guys. Cause what happens, if it gets out of the first round, even in those, I think 3 of the 4 most recent subs he's had, the guys have subbed themselves, essentially. 2 guys slammed themselves into triangles. Another guy was half pregnant on top and didn't know when to either posture or bury. And so he sat in the middle, got armbarred.
And he's 0-1 in the UFC.
Yeah. And that's one real quick point, just a sidebar I want to hit on in terms of step up in competitions. Like people talk about oh, well, he fought Kelleher. Kelleher's good. It's like, okay, but look at the fight. He didn't do anything. He got taken down, passed, mounted, and subbed in 2.5 minutes. So I don't give a shit if he's fought the quote unquote better guy.
Yeah.
He looked terrible in doing so. So despite even me thinking, once again, this is a good spot for him, I don't want to sit there. If I'm making 150 lineups, I do not want 150 of Osborne. I'll probably go I'll probably throw him in 50%, to be honest.
I think that's a smart play here. I mean, because he's no Amanda Nunes. Where everybody was really pretty confident that Amanda Nunes was going to win. No one knew how she was going to score. But to your point, I do this a lot on the RotoWire pod, but I always like to bring up James Tahuna. And I remember when James Tahuna, he has since retired, but he was fighting a Canadian ex-hockey player who was coming off this couch to take a last-minute fight named Steve Basse, who actually had a great fight with Sean O'Connell, a fight of the year fight back and forth. But everybody was commenting on how, James Tahuna had been finished by some really good fighters, and I'm like, okay, this guy, he's still been finished by very good fighters. So all of a sudden, the guy that is coming off of 3 knockout losses with better fighters is all of a sudden going to be a 5-2 favorite against a pretty hard hitter. And what happened? Of course, he went out and got smoked. So I always tell people, like, yes, you want to look at competition, but don't overvalue, especially coming off a loss. Like, don't overvalue a guy having fought better coming off a loss.
Yeah. So let's real quick talk about lineup construction for GPPs here. If you are playing for the big prize this week, you're planning on max entering. Obviously, I kind of touched on it, but it doesn't seem like a card where there's many places to hide here. So it kind of seems like something where, you have two options here. Either take your stands, which, again, given how volatile this card seems like it could be, that seems risky, or really spread it out, which obviously comes with its own flaws. Luke, any take on that?
Honestly, one, just from a general betting perspective, it's been hard for me to just even find value on the card. So that kind of speaks, credence to your points. So for me, in my approach, once again, haven't built or constructed everything out yet, but how I'm looking to probably approach it is more take, I guess, the spread it out type of narrative, just because there's just so many fights on this card that there's nowhere I just really want to plant my flag on and necessarily and ride that guy, just because I see so much merit to both sides, and there's so many volatile matchups. Smith volatile, Rodriguez volatile, CDF, Dariush pretty volatile in my opinion, Volkov maybe to some extent volatile, Pantoja pretty volatile, Osborne even to some extent volatile. So I think there's a lot of volatility, man. And it depends on the card. For me, sometimes obviously the strategy will change based on the card. And there's a couple like guys that I just really, really love, but this is a card where I just see a lot of merit to different guys. So I think I'm going to, I guess, play the cover my bases strategy for this card and sprinkle it out.
Joe, how about you?
Okay, so just a quick point here. If you're going to max out the $18 contest, that's $2,700. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
What I tell people to do, and I have people reach out to me and say, hey, I've got some experience, wagering, but I'd like to kind of get into DFS. Obviously, the large prize pools are attracting a lot of people. And what I tell people to do is, and I will be very honest and tell you that I don't see any contest under $3. Like I am barred from playing any contest under $3. I had 1 month where I made black status, and I immediately am a high velocity player. Even though I only did it for 1 month and I only did it in one sport, so I can't see anything under $3. So there is, I believe, a dollar contest in MMA with 150 entries, and there's also a quarter arcade, right? 20 entries. So what I would suggest people do is, invest $155 and play the quarter arcade and play the 150 max center. And this is where you could really get comfortable playing with the lineup optimizer, utilizing strategies, determining variances. That is what I would suggest that, you guys do who are kind of migrating over. Look, and I'm not going to make light of the fact that $155 isn't a lot of money. I mean, there are guys out there that play $10 a slate and they're really happy, if they double their money, and I can appreciate that. So I'm not making light of the fact that $155 is not a lot of money. But I mean, if you are, if you've been playing, say, $50 to $100 units, and again, I'm old school, I'm not like a unit wagerer, but if you're playing $150 to $100 units and you're getting into DFS and you're willing to put $155 into a slate, that is where I would start if you want to play GPPs, right? And that's where you could start building a strategy and developing a strategy. And let's be honest, one of the good things about playing 150 lineups is you're generally not going to lose all 150. You will get some return back. Now, you might not, get your money back the first couple times, but try to look at that as, and some of these lineup optimizers let you do a rewind. So you can actually see how you played, what you should have played. You can kind of just rewind on a slate. And I would say learn as much from what you did wrong as what you did right. And don't get overly cocky if you have a really good week, because DFS is a fickle bitch. I mean, we had 3 slates to kick off the new year. I lost a little bit in the first slate. crushed the second slate, which was a Wednesday slate, which I played while I was working. I mean, not only did I crush it, I won 29 entries into the main contest for the Saturday, the UFC, the big slate. I won 29 entries. I completely shit the bed. I mean, I literally I think I might have gotten, a few bucks back. Like it was like a 90% loss. Like I lost everything. It was just really bad. Obviously, it was pretty heavy on Connor, which really pissed me off. But like I did everything wrong. So like it is such a fickle bitch. You're gonna lose more than you're gonna win. The idea is that the win should be a lot bigger.
Yeah.
Right. So that is what I would suggest in how you kind of. And I just happen to, again, I'm a bottom up lineup builder, so I look for value in the lower end, and then I kind of work from there. Right. That's just how I do it. I know other people kind of build top to bottom, but whatever works for you. The other thing I do, and I tell people this all the time, as soon as the salaries drop, I will build one lineup from the gut. Like I will just look at the prices and say, you know what, and again, I'm a little weird in that I haven't missed a UFC slate since 2015. So like, and the only other organization I really watch regularly is Invicta. So like my memory is pretty good. So based off of memory, without doing a whole lot of study, I will build one lineup as soon as salaries drop. And I will always play that lineup. Once it actually won me a GPP and like a ticket to a final event. So I always do that and then see how your thought process changes over the course of a week.
Yeah, agreed. And I think for me, I mean, I am personally a fan of most of the time of mentoring GPPs, keeping the core pretty tight and just taking my shots where I really like them. I found that that's generally paid. I mean, obviously that also has the big time bust upside as well.
Yes.
That's happened more than a few times to me. But I think for this week, I have to spread it out. Like I said, I'm going to be pretty exposed to the low tier here. And yeah, I'll probably kind of have outside of Stammen, who I'll be fairly heavy on. I'll have fairly not minimal exposure, but fairly even light exposure to the high range outside of maybe Sandhagen and Zalal. So real quick, let's close it up. But how about everybody go from your top play for a GPP in each tier? Luke, want to start?
Yeah. So you said top play to start, right?
Yeah, top play in each tier.
All right. So yeah, I'm going a slight bit contrarian in that top. I'm going with Stamen at 9.2K. I think everybody else is going to be a lot higher on some of these other guys. I think a couple of them, or at least I think one of them, if not two of them, might actually bust. So that's kind of my contrarian angle for the top. I like Rosa, 8.7K, Volkov, 8.6. Probably have some Pantoja, 8.3. I'm going to obviously have Osborne, and then my lower punt's going to be Janes at 7K.
Yeah. So Joe, how about you? You want to take it?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you one. I guess, and again, this is a really kind of a lukewarm answer. I'm going to say that the upper tier cuts off at at 9, since we've got so many fighters above 9. So if we're looking above 9 or above, I'm going to go with, and it pains me to say this, I'm going to go with, Rodriguez again, this is for GPPs, not cash. I'm going to go with Rodriguez. In the mid-range, it's close, but I'm going to go with Volkov over Rosa. And then in the lower range, which again, I'm going to look at as, let's say 7.8 or under. Look, it's too easy to pick Odie. Yeah. So I'll give another pick. I guess I'll go with Choi.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So for me, I kind of come down to the same spot as Luke here. I like Stamen a lot. I know it's a bit risky, but he scored 126 before, and this is probably the worst opponent he's faced in his UFC career.
True.
So yeah, I'll probably have my most exposure up top to him, and then after that, probably Smith, just because I think, even though I don't love Smith in the matchup, I think Smith's, has a very strong chance to win in the first round. Mid-tier, I'm going to be very heavy on Volkov here. I like him in the fight. I think if he wins, he's going to probably smash the slate, to be honest. Not necessarily the high scorer, but I'm pretty sure he'll be optimal if he wins. I also like Pantoja there. I think his win is going to be predicated on a fairly early finish. So, and then bottom tier, honestly, I have two that I really like. I mean, I like a lot here, but I think the two that I like the most and who I'll have a lot of exposure to are going to be Janes and what's her name, Procopio. I think Janes has a good chance to win this fight, and he's going to be optimal if he wins. And yeah, like I said, Procopio, she's got the metrics to score in a decision, and really could break the slate if she can get her grappling going. So that is my take. You guys have any last thoughts you want to add?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is, and I do play both cash and GPPs, so I would certainly pretty much start every cash lineup with Stamen and Odie, and then build around those guys. Like, see what your average salary is. And let me help you all out. I'll tell you what you're going to have left if you start every lineup in cash. And again, some people don't play cash because they more have a GPP mindset. But if you're going to play cash, and you start out your cash lineup with Stamen and Odie, you are going to have
33, right?
You're going to have $8,250 left for per fighter for 4 fighters. Yeah. So you're going to have an average of $8,250 per fighter to work with. But that is how I would start my cash lineup with Odie and Stamen.
Luke, do you agree with that?
Yeah. Once again, I'm not going to throw, even in cash, I'm not going to throw everything in Osborne just because I still think there's some
well, wait, here's a question I have
there.
for you. You play multiple cash lineups? Because I only play one.
Yeah, I'll mix it up. But honestly, I play primarily more more GPPs. I don't do a ton of cash, but yeah, I'll usually go heavy on one, but then I'll sprinkle in like 2 or 3 adjacent ones.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. I agree. Like I said, Stamen's my favorite play on the slate. And yeah, I mean, I think you kind of have to play Odie mostly in cash. But yeah, I mean, that's what we got for you tonight. Luke and I will be back next Thursday. Joe, thank you for stopping by.
Anytime, brother.
Guys, we will see you soon. We'll see you next week. Good luck this weekend.
Peace.
Peace.